Yeah, all right.
Let's see here. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. here at the library is Buena woodpile presentation on petrified wood given by a local fossil collector, guide free, about petrified wood, and it's for kids. I'm sure adults, if you want to show up, come on up here and it'll be a terrific presentation. People work hard at these. Okay, Darren, you ready?
Yeah.
Come on up here, buddy.
Well, our wonderful books mentioned that somebody should come up and read a book.
It's got to be the Cliff Notes, though.
I was mostly giving it a hard time. So last time I was up here, I talked about gravity, artificial gravity, and real gravity. But this time I want to talk about something else that I've been studying that I think is really interesting and important. The quality of life in an area is what draws people to live there, right? It sucks to live there, nobody wants to go. Certain neighborhoods in Ukraine kind of suck. So when we think about things like SpaceX wants to send 1 million people to Mars, and some people suggest eating crickets, I'm like, what? No. So I got to thinking about what does it take to give people a high standard of living in such a strange place? And there's a lot to think about that. We'll take a whole bunch of that and set it aside. But one of the things that people find really, really, really important, and you can see it by the number of videos on YouTube, food. We like food. We like all kinds of food. We like fruits and vegetables. We have complaints about whether people should eat meat or not. But when you talk about a place that's as much as 300 below zero, or 300 above zero, depending on whether it's day or night, like the moon, growing plants and even having meat animals is a very, very difficult technical problem. And those technical problems are actually worth rewarding people if they succeed in solving those problems. But when you talk about going to the grocery store and you look at all the different food products that we have, and you can skip all the stuff that's like canned soup that has 1 million different ingredients in it, and just look at the individual ingredients before they're cut or processed or cooked or all of these kinds of things. Where do we get bananas? Where do we get coconuts? Where do we get cucumbers? And we like all these things. How many in here like strawberries? Very popular. How about chocolate? Who likes chocolate? There's some panicking like wildness. That's great. Well, strawberries are easy to grow. They're easy to grow in a farm field. They're easy to grow in hydroponics. So that's not a big deal, right? Because if you take it to the moon or Mars, or if you want to go into some space colony way out in space, it has to grow essentially hydroponically. You have to grow it in a closed box. But chocolate does not grow very well in a closed box. Nobody has really figured out hydroponic chocolate. Cacao is a plant that only really likes to grow in a very narrow band in the world and only in a few places. So the person who solves the chocolate problem is going to be super popular on the moon and Mars. Right? They're going to be like statues in the honor of the guy who brought them chocolate. And that's where my thought of, does anybody here know what a flowchart is? Raise a hand, flowchart. Not as common of a concept. It's pretty simple. Imagine a tree diagram with a bunch of little bubbles on it. And each bubble is something that is necessary for the next thing to happen, but had other things behind it that were necessary before it could happen. Strawberries are kind of up high on the list because they're easy to do. Once you have things like water and electricity, LED lights and things like that, you can grow strawberries. But to have strawberry ice cream on the moon of Mars, you're gonna have a bigger challenge. And that comes below strawberries. In order to have strawberry ice cream, you need strawberries. Well, what else do you need? Anybody give me an idea of what
Cows.
you might need?
Cows.
Maybe. You might try goats, but that might not work so well because people tend to think that goat milk is a little strange.
Oh, it is good.
There we go. So I looked into what could we have as an alternative that's not as big, not as hard to ship, not as hard to keep alive. Turns out sheep might be really great for them. So the flow chart of Exodus is all the little things that we have to solve if we want the people who do choose to go to live on Mars and explore all that science and bring all that knowledge back to the ones who don't choose to go. Because we want them to have a high standard of living. They might be our cousins, might be our sister, might be one of the little 8th graders over here someday, might be on Mars. And we like those people. And we like that they should go out and bring knowledge back to us. So how do we solve the very difficult collection of problems that is bringing them a high standard of living? So today I'm looking on the internet and I'm looking for a list of every agricultural product on earth. There isn't such a list. There's partial lists. There's a list of the top 10. There's a list of the most popular 10 or so in the US or in the UK or in different places around the world. But we don't really have a good solid list readily available online that is absolutely, positively every agricultural product that we make. And I think it's a really interesting thing to contemplate is if we want people to be able to produce their own food, because it's extremely expensive to ship something that costs thousands of dollars just to get into orbit, and then we ship that stuff all the way to Mars, or even just to the moon. It's extremely expensive. So it's better to grow it where the people are in that instance. Which means they're going to do without, the first people there are going to be eating your basic ISS food, or even worse, Apollo food. Never mind the Ziploc, you don't want to know about the Ziploc. It's terrifying. With the blue stuff in it, you have to squish. She knows. You can ask her. I don't know. Yeah. Don't ask her. You don't want to. Yes, okay. Getting advice and handle crap. So, if there's a favorite food, who has a favorite food? Tell me a favorite food. Somebody pick, what's your favorite food?
Curry rice.
Curry and rice. Okay, so that means you probably need good basmati rice from the foothills of the Himalayan mountains. Because that's what good curry and rice uses. Every Arab in the world uses basmati rice. And most of it, a whole bunch of chunk.
I use Botan. That's a great
An
one.
outlier. We won't beat him with sticks. It's okay. Right? So you need probably chicken, unless you're doing vegetarian, and you need a host of spices. Now, that's where your flowchart of Exodus, for your little section, is going to get really complicated because most of those spices will not grow in agriculture. At least right now. So you either ship these really expensive spices that are very expensive per pound all the way to Mars for every batch of curry that you want 1 million people on Mars to be able to have. Or you start one spice at a time in a college somewhere, solving how to grow it in a box, a hermetically sealed box, which is all of its nutrients, its temperature, the CO2 levels, the UVA, UVB light, and maybe even UVC light, which will burn your skin. And to do it very efficiently, you add extra CO2 because it grows extra vegetative growth, which means your workers have to wear something that adds oxygen to their breath and have to have eyeglasses to stop the UVs, I think it's B and C, from burning their eyes. You solve all those problems, and your friends on Mars can have careers. And that's my presentation of the flowchart of excellence. If anybody has questions about that or thinks they have some good input, it's an ongoing project for me. Thank you very much.
Darren Merchant, everybody.